Before we begin, subscribe if you care about survival lessons learned through history rather than trends. Materials are rarely neutral. What we build with shapes how long we last, how much energy we spend, and how easily we recover when things fail. History shows a repeated pattern. Humans replaced older survival materials with newer ones that looked better on paper, only to discover later that something essential had been lost. Modern survival culture celebrates innovation, lightweight fabrics, synthetic insulation, advanced coatings. Yet armies, explorers, and outdoor workers repeatedly found themselves reverting to older materials when modern ones failed under real conditions. These reversions were not sentimental, they were practical corrections. One of the most obvious examples is wool. For centuries, wool was the backbone of cold weather survival. It insulated even when wet, resisted odor, retained structure, and could be repaired easily. When militaries shifted to cotton and later synthetics, they gained comfort and uniformity, but lost reliability. Cotton kills is not a slogan, it is a historical observation. Wool remained functional after rain, snow, and sweat. Many modern materials might outperform wool when tested in the lab, but they often fall short in the real world. When these materials get damaged, compressed, or saturated, they just don't hold up like wool does. History, if you think about it, favored materials that degraded slowly over time rather than failing suddenly without warning. Leather, well, it tells a similar story, doesn't it? Traditionally, boots, belts, harnesses, packs, and sheaths were made of thick leather. Why? Because leather molded to the body, absorbed shock, and with just a bit of basic treatment could be maintained indefinitely. It's fascinating how something so simple could be so effective. Synthetic replacements, sure, they're lighter and cheaper, but they often fail catastrophically, don't they? I mean, a cracked polymer strap, for instance, can't be stitched back together. And when a laminate tears, it tends to delaminate completely. It's a stark contrast to leather, which can often be repaired and continue to serve its purpose. Leather could be reconditioned, reshaped, and repaired in the field with minimal tools. Soldiers and civilians alike learned that survivability meant maintainability. Natural fibers like linen and hemp were also replaced with synthetics for reasons of cost and mass production. Linen breathes, dries quickly, resists rot, and remains strong when wet. Hemp fibers endure abrasion and tension without catastrophic failure. Modern synthetic fabrics often trap moisture. They can melt under heat or even tear along stress points. And it's a bit surprising how these weaknesses show up, especially when you really need your gear to perform. Historically, people valued fibers that failed slowly and predictably. This kind of failure allowed for adaptation rather than a sudden and total loss. It's actually quite practical when you think about it. Wood is another material we replaced a bit too eagerly. Traditional shelters, tools, and handles were made from wood, not because metal was unavailable, but because wood absorbs shock, insulates against the cold, and stays workable with simple tools. It's really quite remarkable how versatile wood can be. Modern composite handles can sometimes transmit a fair bit of vibration, and they might even crack when put under stress or become brittle if it's really cold out. Soldiers who found themselves in cold environments quickly learned that metal tools just couldn't be handled without gloves, whereas wood, well, it remained usable even in freezing temperatures. Throughout history, it's been understood that materials really have to cooperate with the human body, not simply resist force. Stone and earth were also quietly abandoned. Earthworks, sod shelters, and stone structures provided insulation, camouflage, and thermal stability unmatched by lightweight modern materials. Concrete and metal replaced them in many cases, only to introduce problems of brittleness, thermal conduction, and maintenance complexity. Traditional materials worked with the environment rather than against it. They absorbed moisture, moderated temperature, and repaired themselves naturally over time. Even animal products, were replaced a bit too soon. Fur, felt, bone, sinew, and horn were once absolutely essential survival materials. Felted wool actually blocked wind much better than woven fabric. Bone and horn, well, they resisted fracture and cold far better than metal ever could. Sinew, interestingly enough, repaired itself under tension. These materials were replaced by synthetics that performed well initially, but, they just lacked longevity and adaptability. History accepted variation and irregularity because, well, it allowed systems to survive damage. One of the greatest regrets in replacing old materials is the loss of local sourcing. Historical survival materials came from the environment itself. This meant repairs did not depend on supply chains, but, modern materials require specialized manufacturing and really precise replacements. When resupply fails, modern systems, well, they just collapse. History built redundancy into materials by choosing those that could be replaced or supplemented locally. Another overlooked factor is thermal behavior. Many modern materials insulate poorly when they're compressed, wet, or dirty. Old materials actually accounted for these realities. Wool, fur, earth, and wood all retained their function, even when subjected to a bit of abuse. They were chosen not for peak performance, but for consistency across conditions. Survival, after all, rarely demands the best possible outcome. It demands an acceptable one, over time. Applying this knowledge today does not mean rejecting modern materials outright. It means, understanding what was lost. Choose materials that fail gradually, and really favor those that can be repaired with basic tools. It's important to, understand how materials behave when they're wet, cold, or even damaged. The way they respond under these conditions can really shape our approach to using them effectively. We should, honestly, build systems that assume failure rather than simply deny it. Planning for things to go wrong is, in many ways, a far more practical approach. Throughout history, society replaced materials when it could actually afford to. But, interestingly, it always returned to the old ones when it had no other choice. If this sort of grounded perspective matters to you, do consider subscribing to Strange History and share this with anyone who thinks survival improved just because materials became newer. The past solved problems that, well, modern systems are still relearning, and often at a much higher cost.